Hi folks, welcome to the Physical Education Podcast. I'm P.A. Morand from the Back Pain Coach, and today I'm going to be talking about nutrition from the point of view of stress and pain reduction. What I'm going to outline is where most nutritional advice goes wrong and how nutrition for pain and stress reduction is probably the complete opposite of what you would expect, and how most of what you might believe about nutrition is actually wrong, which I understand is quite a bold claim, but I want to be upfront before we start that I'm not a nutritionist. I'm a physical therapist by training with a psychology degree, and so what I'm going to be sharing with you is based on my personal experience of overcoming 15 years of chronic pain and my own independent research on the topic of nutrition. And so to present a bit of balance and objectivity to this, I want to point out that this is merely my own perspective, and I'm perfectly comfortable with being wrong, as I've been wrong before, but I've always been happy to accept I'm wrong and keep searching for the truth, because ultimately that's all that matters. And we're going to discuss this in detail, the sort of dogmatic aspects of nutrition and how we can become entrenched in different viewpoints. And nutrition, it's an extremely polarizing topic, and everyone seems to have a strong stance on this topic. So I try not to be entrenched in one position or to have allegiance to one viewpoint. I'm open to all perspectives, and if you're dismissing this position based on my credentials, or lack of credentials we could say, which is a common complaint that people will have, and I would say it's somewhat of a fair complaint. To that, I would say no one has a monopoly on the truth and on accurate information, which is one of the great things about our access to information in modern times. Everyone has access to information if they have access to a library, to the internet, or if they can buy a book. So I would say, based on that, don't dismiss what I'm going to share with you. Don't dismiss it immediately on account of my credentials, but also don't take my word as gospel. You may want to view what I'm presenting as food for thought that allows you to make up your own mind and make the right decisions for your needs. So really, one of my ultimate goals with this and all of the content I produce is for it to be thought-provoking and to challenge you, because what I've found after years of dealing with my own pain is that the truth is nuanced, and it's what needs to happen for you to overcome pain is quite individual, and we waste a lot of time and money and resources going just blindly following certain approaches and not really knowing why we do what we do. And that's really what I want to equip you with, is the ability to know why you're doing what you're doing. And I'll share a bit about that towards the end as I talk about my own experience with trying different nutritional approaches and basically making my health worse. So, as I've discussed extensively in the past, pain is created based on the brain perceiving some sort of threat. So any kind of elevation of stress is going to lead to the brain and the body feeling more threatened. So in the simplest terms, if we want to reduce pain, we need to make the brain and the body feel as safe as possible. So it's a simple enough concept. And one of the major ways we can make the brain and body feel safe is through adequate nutrition. So this is what we're going to be discussing today, and we'll be asking, what is nutrition that is nourishing and that creates safety in the body? And what is nutrition that reduces the levels of stress hormones in the body? And these are perspectives that are rarely covered in popular nutrition advice, and as you'll soon find out, they tend to fly in the face of most of what we've been told about nutrition. So stay tuned for that. So the simplest way we can make the brain and body feel safe is by providing enough calories for the demands of our lives, because everything has a cost. To simply lie in bed and do nothing requires a certain amount of calories, and obviously if we do more, then we require more calories, and if we don't provide sufficient calories, then two things will tend to happen. And the first is that there will be some sort of compromise in function in some part of the body. So for example, our digestive function might be reduced in order to sort of ration the energy stores we have. So the example I use is that you have an income of €1,000, for example, but it costs €1,200 to run all parts of the body at full function. So to run all of your organ systems at 100% capacity, or just as well as possible, it would cost €1,200 hypothetically. But all you are getting in, or all you are able to use, is €1,000 worth of energy. So there's a deficit there. And unless you provide sufficient calories, or in this case income, so to speak, there will be a trade-off, and some part or parts of your body will be functioning at a reduced capacity. Now, the second way we can create safety in the body is the second thing that will tend to happen is that the body will have to find another way of procuring energy. So if we're not providing enough calories to the body has to find a way. It has to procure energy some way, and it usually does this by converting muscle tissue or fat stores into energy. And this is actually a very useful feature of the human body, and it's often touted as being optimal by people who are proponents of things like the ketogenic diet or low carbohydrate approaches, or any forms of fasting such as intermittent fasting or multiple day fasts. The issue with the body running out of energy stores and having to convert muscle or fat stores into energy is that it's actually quite a stressful process, and it requires the elevation of stress hormones, and it can add to the overall burden on the body. So we also need to understand that our brain and its sense of survival are unconsciously controlled, while we consciously know that we're only engaging in a fast for a few hours. So if you do intermittent fasting, you know that your next meal is in 16 hours. Consciously you know that, but unconsciously your survival instincts don't necessarily realize that, because they don't work in the same fashion. And so what we end up doing is we stress these unconscious survival instincts. And if we've been stressed and in pain for a long time, which is likely the case if you're watching this video, if you're interested in pain relief, so if we've been in pain for a long time, and as a result we've been stressed for a long time, our brain is going to be on high alert for any additional threats to our survival. So a lack of food is a threat to your survival. It's the potential threat of famine as far as your unconscious survival based mind is concerned. So in really severe cases, the experience of a mild fasting period could be perceived as the threat of famine, and you're going to have an elevation of stress hormones and all sorts of downstream negative effects because of that. And those are on the more extreme sides of things, but this happens to varying degrees, and it's just to kind of challenge you on that, because there is a popularity in deprivation of eating, and a popularity with things like fasting and low carbohydrate diet. So with this in mind, hopefully you can see how the restriction of food as well as the frequency of consumption are relevant factors in our overall stress level. So what's popular again in intermittent fasting would be that you still eat a large amount of calories, but only during a very small window of time. But that's still a large portion of the day when you're not getting calories, and your unconscious mind might be feeling very threatened by that, and will be increasing stress hormones. And regardless of that, it's going to need to increase stress hormones to keep producing energy. So I think it's worth mentioning this, because we tend not to suspect these things as relevant, because they're not really talked about much in the world of health and nutrition. And on top of this, most of what we're told is the complete opposite of this. We're generally encouraged to eat complex foods that are slow to digest, and the reasoning is that these foods are often low in calories, and that they're filling, and that they will be absorbed slowly, leading to a more gradual release of energy. And the consistent theme running through these recommendations is one of restriction and deprivation. So we need to consume fewer calories, we need to eat bulky foods so that we trick ourselves into eating less, and we have to work hard to extract every last bit of energy from our food, as if eating is another form of exercise, and that we have to earn the nutrition from our food. And this is all tied into warped ideas of health and fitness, where the pinnacle of good health seems to be to have a low body fat percentage and the ability to withstand punishment through the form of exercise. And there's rarely any consideration for a broader perspective on health that considers your mental and emotional well-being. So we're not really considering, well, what does health mean? You know, a six-pack doesn't necessarily equate to health. And I'm not saying that we should go the opposite way. I'm just saying that so much of what we perceive as being healthy is more so fitness, or it's just an arbitrary standard that's just been marketed to us. So most of the nutritional advice works from this body composition or fitness focused point of view, but appealing body composition and high levels of fitness are not necessarily signs of good health, as I've said. And if that sounds odd to you, which is fair enough because we see it everywhere, if that sounds odd to you, I would ask you, which groups of people are consistently ranked as the healthiest and with the highest quality of life and highest life satisfaction? And it's not generally the bodybuilders or the fitness models or the Olympians or the Instagram models. It's often remarkably normal looking people who have created a healthy balance between the physical, mental, emotional and biological aspects of their lives. The reality is that the fitness and nutrition industries are industries. They're trying to sell us the latest product, and they're trying to capitalize on our insecurities, and they're not necessarily concerned with our health. They're concerned with convincing us that what they have to offer is going to be beneficial to our health. And this isn't inherently bad. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be sold things and they can't make a profit doing these different things. It's just a reality that we need to grasp, and we can navigate it then if we realize that. And I mention this because people can be so quick to demonize and denounce the pharmaceutical industry on the one hand for its shady motivations, and that's all fair enough, but the same people won't question for a second going into a health food shop and buying into all of the propaganda of the latest natural remedy that is the cure to all of life's problems. And of course, within all of this, there are people who genuinely mean well and who make recommendations because they want to help, but their good intentions don't make them right. And these fitness and nutrition gurus have their own biases and insecurities that are influencing the advice they offer. So we need to question everything. We need to challenge things. We need to think critically and not see good intentions and people meaning well as being proof of the truth. So there are problems with a lot of the advice we get around nutrition, particularly when it comes to pain, because pain relief needs to take into consideration the brain and its survival instincts. So how do we eat in a way that makes our bodies feel safe? That's the big question that we're going to be tackling. And the short answer is it depends on the individual. And the long answer is we need to eat foods that our bodies can digest easily without additional and unnecessary downsides. Because most foods have negatives as well as positives. They have certain nutrients as well as what are called anti-nutrients. And what we're looking for is a net positive effect from the food and how it interacts with your body. So for example, raw broccoli appears to have certain antioxidants, which appears to be a positive thing. And this is what will be highlighted, when they're trying to sell you the latest freeze-dried, purified, grass-fed, concentrated broccoli extract. But broccoli also has some negative compounds, much like most foods. This isn't about broccoli. I'm not picking on broccoli. And these negative compounds, they prevent the absorption of the nutrients, and they can have a negative effect on the body. So, is there a net positive to the consumption of that food or not? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. And again, I can't say with any certainty, but I don't believe anyone can or really should tell you with any certainty which is right for you. At least not without knowing more about you and your individual biology. So the problem is with this is that we generally want cookie cutter templates, and we want meal plans. We want to be told what to eat and when to eat it. But this is part of why we've developed our health issues in the first place, because we've lost the ability to perceive our body's reactions. And that was a major epiphany for me, is the shift from being a passive receiver of treatment or receiver of information to being someone who is thinking critically and evaluating things in the context of my body. So this content is all about encouraging you to that point and helping you attain that point. So just to illustrate the point of most foods having negatives and positives, I thought I'd share some examples that might be surprising to you. So for example, nuts and seeds are broadly considered healthy and beneficial. They're high in certain vitamins and high in what are claimed to be healthy fats. That's a topic for another day. So on paper they seem great. You go into a health food shop, it's a wall of nuts and seeds. You go into your local supermarket and the nuts and seeds are in the health food section. But their high fat content means they digest slowly, which according to some people is a good thing. But it also means that there's more opportunity for the food to influence your digestive system. So more opportunity to feed bad bacteria. And there are also downsides of the anti-nutrients, which are stressful to your gut lining and can adversely affect the production of digestive enzymes. So on top of this, the fats found in nuts and seeds tend to be unstable at high temperatures, which is why we're generally encouraged to keep oils in cool, dark places, preferably not exceeding about 20 degrees Celsius, according to a website that specializes in olive oil and everything to do with olive oil. So basically average room temperature, you don't really want to exceed that temperature when you're storing oils, and these are the kinds of oils that come out of nuts and seeds that are very sensitive to heat. But the important thing to grasp is that our average body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. So we're advised not to store them above 20 degrees Celsius, but our average body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. So we need to consider the fact that this is potentially enough to spoil the fat content and produce a negative effect from something that is generally considered a positive. And you'll see this as you look into cooking oils. They'll talk about high smoking points, and the more saturated an oil is, the more stable it is at room temperature. So you look at something like butter, it's solid at room temperature. Same with coconut oil, but then olive oil or vegetable oils are liquid. So that's all to do with their saturation and their resilience to heat. So a lot of these oils, they don't tolerate heat very well, and so when they go into our bodies, they react negatively, and that's going to create an elevation in stress hormones. So that's something worth considering when it comes to nuts and seeds, which are always considered to be good. And I'm not saying they're bad or you shouldn't eat them, but that you should understand the counter argument so that you can navigate that in an informed manner. Now, the next good example would be leafy green vegetables. So they've got all sorts of nutrients and antioxidants, but they also have anti-nutrients that will prevent the proper absorption of these and cause their own issues. So now you can prepare vegetables to reduce or even eliminate those downsides, but you're still left with a high fiber content, which for some people can be too abrasive on their gut lining. So fiber can be a contentious topic. There are good fibers, bad fibers, and then there's the individual. And so for some people, fibers is going to be too abrasive, and that's going to create issues. On top of this, when it comes to leafy green vegetables, they've got a very low calorie content, which some people would say is good, but this means you have to work very hard to extract nutrients for not much reward in the form of calories. And this is a story we hear a lot about celery. People always talk about celery and how it requires more calories to digest it than you get from the food, which, depending on the context, again, context is everything, this might be a good or a bad thing. In the case of chronic pain, when our goal should be to help the body feel safe and provide an abundance of usable energy, this might actually be detrimental. So this idea of restricting calories, I believe is very detrimental to the pursuit of stress reduction That doesn't mean you eat everything. That doesn't mean you eat 50,000 calories a day, but it means maybe you shouldn't be restricting calories as religiously. So ultimately it is individual and it's context specific, but this is all just to kind of challenge you on maybe some of the beliefs you might have, and just to present a counter argument so that you can be more informed. Ultimately, the point I want to make is that most of our beliefs about foods and nutrition are based on marketing. What we really need is an individualized diet that's suitable to our individual needs, and we are generally the most suited to determine what this is. So yes, a highly qualified nutritionist or whatever can give you recommendations, but you're the person living in your body. You're the person who feels how the body makes you feel, and you're the person who has to live with it. And so you are the most situated and the best situated to evaluate the merits of your nutrition. So the problem with this, so this is what I keep pushing, is individual ownership, personal ownership of your health. But it's very hard to market this because it's an internal solution. It doesn't make you dependent on a product that you can be sold again and again. So if I tell you that this supplement has everything you need and this is what's going to solve your problem, you'll keep buying that every month for the rest of your life. And so, you talk about the lifetime, from a business perspective, you talk about the lifetime value of a customer. That person buys 20 euros worth of supplements once a month for, the next 50 years. That's a lot of money, especially when many, many people are doing this. And again, there's nothing inherently bad about that. Companies should be able to earn a living. People should be able to be sold things, and people should be able to buy things. But we're not marketed the internal solution because there's no real value in marketing the internal solution. So just again, some food for thought to really challenge where the information is coming from and what is the motivation behind that information. So the next question really is, how do we know which foods are right for us? So I'm sort of poking holes in different things, and I'm saying you need to eat what's right for you. So what is right for you? In the simplest terms, we examine our body's response to a food or foods. We examine the response to a meal, and we ask ourselves, how did we feel afterwards? What symptoms developed or what symptoms were reduced following a certain food or following a certain meal? And then did our body temperature increase or decrease? Did our heart rate change significantly, up or down? Ideally, if we eat something that is good for our bodies and that we can digest easily and use as energy, we should feel warm and calm afterwards, because what we've done is provided the body with resources, and now it can use those resources to fuel different functions. So we've created a sense of safety. And essentially what this is an increase in metabolism. Your metabolism will increase when stress is low because the body feels like it has the resources, it's safe to do all this stuff, and the metabolism will decrease when you're highly stressed because it wants to conserve energy. So what this translates to for you within your body is a comfortable increase in body temperature. You should feel nice and warm and calm, but not hot or anything like that. So with this in mind, you may ask yourself if you often tend to feel cold, or if you have cold feet, cold hands, or cold, even like a cold nose. For some of you, you may lack the awareness to even notice a lot of these things, because people sort of get used to the way they feel, and they just don't notice. They just feel normal because this is the way they felt. And you can also sometimes this was my experience, I felt a certain amount of pride in being comfortable with the cold. I was always cold, but the way I spun that was, I tolerate the cold and that's a sign of resilience. But really what that was for me was that my body was in this highly stressed state, and my metabolism was very slow, and it was conserving energy too. It was essentially in a sort of constant fight or flight mode, in this survival mode. So you need to kind of reflect, and you may need to ask a loved one, because they might comment frequently on the fact that you have cold hands, cold feet, or that you're always cold, or that you always need to wrap up and wear multiple layers regardless of how warm it might be. So and really what this is your body is converting that food into energy, and that's what's generating the heat. So if energy is provided, then it's more likely that your brain is going to feel safe, because it no longer has to fear starvation or famine. So that's what, going back to at the start of this episode, talking about how when you have significant periods of fasting, even that might be just a couple of hours, if you're highly stressed, and if you've been stressed for a long time, going for 2 hours without a meal, without balancing your blood sugar, that can be highly stressful to your body, and you might not perceive it that way. So when we provide food, we extinguish that threat of famine, that threat of running out of food, and that threat of death, essentially. So that's why this matters, and that's why you will find that reductions in body temperature are a good indication of a body that's highly stressed. So now, before we get into measuring things in more detail, let's see if we can get a sense of whether or not your nutritional habits might be contributing to your stress level. So I always want to keep things simple. There's a lot of detail. We can go down many rabbit holes when it comes to pain and chronic pain and stress, but I don't want you to be worrying about things unless they really apply to you. Like, it's good to be informed, but we don't want to become obsessive, particularly if it's not relevant to us. So let's try to get a sense if what I'm talking about is actually relevant to you. Is your nutrition maybe not working for you? Could you be doing a bit better? People don't tend to suspect their nutrition, because most people tend to think that they're quite healthy. So the first thing to consider is whether or not you follow a really restrictive diet. So the really popular ones at the moment are a ketogenic diet, or a low carb diet, or even veganism, or vegetarian or fruitarian, or carnivore diet, which is becoming more popular. Any kind of diet that you subscribe to that seriously restricts you when you, for example, go out to dinner. So if you haven't done any food preparation, if you're out for the day, or if you go out to dinner and you don't really have anything that you can pick from the menu that you can comfortably pick without maybe worrying about what you're going to eat, then that's a cause for concern. And really what we're looking at is the tendency to worry about your inability to adhere to your diet. So like I said, if you, for example, if you're on a low carb diet and you have to go to a pizzeria for a work function, and you decide that all you can have is a salad and a glass of water, because you couldn't possibly eat a carbohydrate because it would completely derail your health efforts and your nutritional efforts. So that level of thinking, getting to that point, that's heading towards disordered eating and disordered thinking about eating. So just consider that for a second and see whether this sounds like you. And so just to give you an extreme example, this is something I experienced when I used to work in a health food shop, and there was a tourist who came in, and they were following this really strict paleo diet, and they didn't know what to eat. They're a tourist in Dublin, and they're in a hotel, they can't cook all their meals, so they don't know what to eat, and it's hard to go to restaurants. And I suggested you could go to a supermarket and they'll do like a rotisserie chicken, or they'll do just whole pieces of meat, straight from the animal, nothing added really, which would have been a sort of an ideal option, given that she was following a paleo diet. But the chickens, they tend to have like this slightest glaze of sugar, like it's barely noticeable, and it's on the skin, so you could even pick it off. But that was enough to discourage her from doing that completely disqualified that as an option for her. So she was that concerned about a gram of sugar passing her lips because she was entrenched in this paleo belief. And I can say with complete confidence that would have made absolutely no difference to her efforts, even if she wanted to remain low carb. Having the tiniest glaze, like really, really minuscule, like you wouldn't even necessarily notice it. If you're worrying about things to that extent, then that should be that should make you pause and question, really how are you approaching your diet, and there's probably a more balanced view that you can approach. So it's not necessarily just about paleo, but it's any kind of diet that prescribes generally a prescriptive list of foods that you need to avoid at all costs, and then diets that tend to demonize certain essential nutrients. Carbohydrates are the popular one at the moment. It used to be fat. We used to demonize fat, and now we're demonizing carbohydrates. The ketogenic diets, low carb, some paleo, they demonize carbohydrates. And then things like demonize sources of food like dairy or animal products. Obviously there are ethical aspects to that, but hardcore veganism, because of the fear of the downsides of animal products, I think is, and some people will disagree, but as far as I can tell, is not a healthy perspective. It makes no sense. So what I will say, again, just if you are entrenched in one position, to really challenge that, is that the simple fact that there are tons of different nutritional ideologies and tons of positive testimonials and miraculous recovery stories for each of these, so for ketosis, for veganism, for paleo, for this, that and the other, for carnivore diets, the simple fact that there are positive stories for all of these is an indication that a lot of things work for some people in different circumstances. The key ultimately is the individual, which is what I keep saying. It's the individual. It's not this system versus that system. It's you as an individual. So if you think you have it all figured out, which tends to be the case, particularly people who are into ketosis and veganism, they seem to think they've got it all figured out and they're high and mighty and all this. I would say consider this fact. Consider how many different approaches there are and how successful they all are, and consider that fact and accept that you might be wrong and your way might not be the best way. It might work for you, but it won't work for everyone, and it might not actually be working for you, which is the challenging thing to grasp with. And hopefully we're going to uncover whether it's working for you or not using strategies that I'm going to outline later on in this episode. So in any case, I would encourage you to keep an open mind and be open to the fact that maybe your ketosis isn't right for you, and we'll give you ways of measuring that and determining that in an objective manner. So beyond this, in terms of determining whether your nutrition is relevant to your pain, we can look at general digestive symptoms that you might experience, things like bloating, heartburn, digestive issues of any kind, really more severe things like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, colitis, which seem to be getting more and more common. And then you can look at things like the frequency of your bowel movements. So there's no hard number. I've talked to a few different people about this, but the healthy range seems to be anywhere between at least one bowel movement per day or one for every meal that you eat. So that's something to think about. How often are you going to the toilet? Is it frequent? Is it regular? Is it irregular? Is it infrequent? And really what we're looking for is effortless bowel movements that they're easy, and you don't have to strain to have the bowel movements, and that they are fairly regular and you can expect them at certain times, and they are at the very least once per day. In some extreme cases, people don't go to the toilet for like a week or 2 weeks. I've heard of 2 weeks, which is crazy. So that's a sign that something is wrong. And if that is going on, that sort of issue, and you've also got pain, then you need to start looking at connections there, because they might well be there. And the reason digestive issues are relevant is because of a lot of so-called healthy foods are actually quite abrasive to the gut lining. So I touched on that a bit before, and the fact that they're abrasive on the gut lining causes issues. It causes the increase of stress hormones and inflammation, and they also tend to offer low levels of calories, which leads to low gut motility. So the gut motility, the ability of the digestive system to move the waste basically down the digestive tract. This actually requires energy. Bowel movements and the digestive process require energy, but we're generally sold the idea of fiber providing bulk, to physically move the digestive process forward. But this is partially marketing as an opportunity to sell high fiber foods, and it's partially just a misunderstanding of healthy digestion. So healthy digestion really happens via the contraction of muscles that move the contents of the gut through the digestive organs. Now, it shouldn't require a certain amount of fiber to take place. And again, that's not to say that fiber is inherently a problem and it has a place and that it can't be useful. It's just that the model that we require fiber solely to physically move the digestive process forward is it's misguided and can lead to its own issues. So now the next list of common symptoms are related to mental and emotional health. So you might ask yourself if you have a tendency towards anxiety. Do you suffer from depression or any other mental health issues? I find this really, really common with people with chronic back pain in particular. It comes hand in hand with usually depression or some sort of mental health issue, and it can be a chicken egg situation. Which came first? Is one the product of the other? But it's really, really common. And then do you have trouble sleeping, which is also common, and particularly issues with quietening your mind. When you go to sleep, can you just relax, or is your mind racing? And then if you wake up, you struggle to fall back asleep because then your mind is racing and you're worrying all night. And then another one is waking up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, usually around 3 or 4 a.m. If that's a very consistent trend, that's a sign of elevated stress hormones, because your stress hormones will peak around 3 or 4 a.m. based on the natural hormone cycle. So if that's happening to the point that you're having to wake up to go to the toilet, then that's a good indication that your body is producing too many stress hormones, and you need to consider that in the bigger picture. Then things like more general things like a lack of drive or lack of motivation, but particularly to the point that it's holding you back. You lack the drive and motivation to do the things that you need to do. And that's something we get into when it comes to chronic pain. Perhaps you're in pain because you are not taking the actions you need to take, and you are working against your best interests, and that needs to be addressed. You need to have the energy to do that, and so that's a sign of chronic stress, and usually a nutritional approach is what we need for that rather than a mobility approach. So nutrition is relevant to our mental health. Again, you might be wondering what does nutrition have to do with my thoughts? And the reason it's relevant is because the food we eat creates the chemical environment from which our thoughts emerge. And this means that we can make ourselves more prone to negativity, to depression, to anxiety, and so on by the foods we eat. And then on top of this, if we're fasting frequently or eating in ways that are causing internal stress, so eating foods that are abrasive, that are increasing stress hormone production, then this will affect our ways of thinking, because we will become more prone to stress and more prone to catastrophizing and worrying and being anxious and so on. So a lot of people tend to presume that they don't have any digestive issues or issues with their diet because they don't have any overt digestive symptoms, but they might have mental health issues instead. So it can be a combination of some or all of these, and as always, it's individual. But I've often seen people with mental health issues that were largely nutritional while having no major digestive symptoms. So again, we're talking about nutrition, and you're thinking, but I don't have any digestive issues, I'm fine, so it can't be nutrition. But if you're having mental health issues, there will be a nutritional component to that. So you don't need overt digestive symptoms to have a nutritional issue. Now, the final types of symptoms we should look out for are slow healing times. Now, if you're dealing with chronic pain, then that's a pretty good indicator of slow healing time. because your body's not healing itself. But you can also look at a tendency towards poor recovery from illness or wounds. If you tend to get sick frequently, or illnesses tend to drag on maybe longer than they really should, then things like frequent bruising or bruising very easily, and then brittle nails, brittle hair falling out, also receding eyebrows. So if the lateral third of your eyebrows is receding, it's thinning, that's generally a good sign of excessive internal stress, because essentially what that is going back to that analogy of you've got €1,000 worth of income, but it costs €1,200 to run everything properly. So what's going to get cut off? Well, I don't really need the lateral portion of my eyebrows. That's not a priority, so I can stop maintaining that if I'm that chronically stressed. And so those are some of the overt external symptoms that you can find, and these are all symptoms of some sort of internal stress, where your body is either not getting enough energy, or it's not able to use energy properly, which is often a result of chronic stress, which perpetuates the issue. And then the other factor would be that maybe some of the foods you're eating are not agreeing with you. So maybe you're eating enough, but the foods you're eating just aren't right for your needs. You have an individual reaction that's negative. So now we're going to look at some measures that you can use to better determine which diet is best for you. Now, the best one I've found is a combination of introspective analysis, so monitoring myself, seeing how I feel, documenting that in a journal, and then tracking body temperature and pulse at different times during the day. So the temperature and pulse give you an objective marker of what your body is doing, and then your introspective analysis gives you a subjective marker of how you feel. What we want to do is we want to see if these measures tend to match. So if the numbers are good, the objective numbers are good, and I feel good, then that's a good sign. But if I feel good but the numbers are bad, then maybe I feel good because of high stress hormones and adrenaline, and vice versa. Or if the numbers are good and I feel bad, then maybe something is amiss and I need to look a bit deeper. So we want to see how these things match, and then over time what we're doing is we're building improved awareness of our body. And I'd like for you to get to a point where you don't need a thermometer or to check your pulse to understand how your body is doing, because you know yourself, how your body physically feels, like what your temperature is like, what your pulse is like when things are going well, and what these things feel like when things are going wrong. So you have that awareness. Now, with the temperature and pulse, there is also an element of individuality, particularly depending on your fitness levels, so your heart capacity. So I don't want you to worry about the numbers precisely, but to analyze the overall trends. So the average healthy range of body temperature is 36.5 degrees Celsius to 37 degrees Celsius, which in Fahrenheit is 97.8 to 98.6 Fahrenheit. So that's your sort of healthy range. And you can measure this with a standard digital thermometer, and be sure to try that a few times to make sure it's giving you consistent readings. And then the average healthy pulse is between 75 beats per minute and 85 beats per minute. Now again, that's going to be somewhat individual based on age, based on fitness levels, but that's a fairly healthy range that you can aim for. And what you want to do is you can measure this with an app on your phone. They just scan your fingertip, or you can simply place 2 fingers on your carotid artery here on your neck, and you would count the beats per minute. You would count for 30 seconds, and then you would double the number. That's what I do. So again, these are just average healthy ranges. We don't need to obsess over them or look at them in isolation, but we want to track these alongside your symptoms to get a sense of everything that's going on. So you'll need to measure these and make a note of your symptoms as soon as you wake up, then 30 minutes after your breakfast, then after about 2 hours of fasting, which is usually just before you have your lunch, and then 30 minutes after your lunch. The general trend we're looking for is that your temperature and your pulse should rise gradually as the day goes by. And if there are drops in temperature, then that's an indication of an increase in stress hormone production. And as you monitor this over time and you monitor your symptoms, you'll begin to get a sense of which foods are working for or against you, or if you should be eating more frequently, because sometimes you might be eating well, but you're just not eating frequently enough, so your body temperature drops because it's going into a stressed state. So this will tell you what your body is doing without any of the marketing spin or of a specific nutritional ideology. So whether you believe in ketosis or not and its benefits, the numbers won't lie. They will tell you how your body feels objectively, because sometimes you can think you feel good, but maybe that's because you're running on adrenaline, and there sometimes our subjective sense of how good we feel isn't necessarily accurate. So that's the value of measuring the two, the objective temperature and pulse and your subjective sense, and seeing how well they match and getting to a point where they consistently match, and so you have that awareness. Now, as is often the case, it's unrealistic and unethical to make recommendations beyond this. This is a trend in my videos. I can't, and it's the point I keep trying to make, is it's individual. These are tools for you to take matters into your own hands. Ultimately, the point I'm making is that nutrition can't be simplified to a list of recommended foods or to a meal plan. You need to eat intuitively, and you need to measure how your body responds. And what I will say is you generally can't go too wrong with eating foods that would have been available to us 100 years ago. So foods that could be grown, that could be raised, or that could be cultivated through traditional means without the need for major industrial processes. So in other words, these would be the foods that your grandparents or your great grandparents would have eaten. So this can include things like fruit, vegetables, meats, dairy, grains, even ice cream. It's a major part of my diet, and I'll talk about that at the end. But really the point is that it's about fresh foods that one could realistically make from scratch. So if it's a processed food, it's still made up of ingredients that you could find. So if it's a sandwich, it's still maybe roast chicken, some vegetables from your garden, and a loaf of bread that you could have baked yourself. So things like that. As long as you stick to that those general guidelines, it's hard to go too wrong. Though obviously you want to check individually, and for some people they need things that are far more extreme and far more controlled. But like I said, these measures, these resources will help you determine that for yourself. And of course, there are people that you can go to who will help you, guide you through this process. So as I begin to wrap up, I think it might be worth sharing what I do and the foods that I eat and my own personal experience with nutrition. And this isn't to, again, it's not to offer a prescription of what to do, but more so to highlight how completely different it can be from the popular advice. So the foods I eat aren't necessarily the foods that you should eat, but I want to show how I came to eat the way I do and how it has changed my health for the better, to eat more intuitively and to eat prescriptively according to a specific dietary dogma was actually detrimental for my health, and how I learned that. So I suppose a standard day for eating for me would be usually in the mornings I either have eggs. If I have the time, I often make milk powder pancakes. Now, going back to, I mentioned that we should generally eat foods that we don't require industrial processing for, large scale industrial processing for. So obviously milk powder, you couldn't have done that traditionally, but the components of milk powder, the nutritional aspects of it are no different from milk. It's just the texture that allows you to make milk powder pancakes. So just to kind of offer some perspective on that. So that's what I've found to be really good. Milk powder pancakes, which are made with milk powder, actual milk, and then eggs, and then a bit of salt, a bit of baking powder, and I would have that with maple syrup, and that's been one of the best breakfasts that I've been able to come up with in terms of creating this calm sense of warmth and clarity and mental clarity. And for some people that might not work, for some people it might not work for now, and it might work in the future. But the point is, it's not something that you're going to read about in the whatever your popular Instagram gurus list of favorite foods. So that would be an average breakfast for me. Then throughout the day I tend to eat frequently. I find that I do best if I'm eating frequently, without large gaps in between my meals. I eat a lot of fruit, particularly quite ripe fruit, things like stewed apples, which breaks down a lot of the fiber. I have quite a low fiber diet, though I eat things like carrots a lot, which are very good for digestion. They're very good to reduce the harmful effects of stress hormones in the body. They help to kind of soak those up and remove them. So I've personally found that very beneficial. I know some people who don't respond to it that well, but it's generally quite a healthy thing to try. Raw carrot. Then typically I would make a soup, homemade soup, with a bone broth. So usually once a week I roast a chicken, and we eat the chicken, and then I keep the bones, and I slow cook the bones to make a high gelatin broth, high mineral broth. And then I cook a soup of potatoes, carrots, and leeks, and I respond to that quite well. And it's also worth mentioning that specific recipe is the same soup that my grandmother used to make. So there's a nostalgic aspect to that, which is valuable. And I think it's nothing to do with the nutrition. I think it's a nutritionally sound lunch to have a nice homemade soup with a lot of gelatin in it, but I could possibly make it better. But the fact that I have an emotional connection, so to speak, to it, and when I eat it, it reminds me of going to my grandmother's, and she was an amazing cook. And so there's that element to it, and we need to think about, when we start looking at nutrition in a deeper sense, we need to consider that, what do these foods mean to us culturally, or what do they evoke in us, and all that sort of stuff. So that's an average lunch. I eat a fair bit of cheese. I get good quality cheeses from Switzerland and France. I really like good cheese, and that's usually made from unpasteurized raw milk, and so you're going to get certain bacteria and enzymes from that, and that's not why I choose to do it, but it could be a factor in why I'm feeling the benefits. And then I eat a lot of things like rice, potatoes, and then meats. My meat consumption is far lower than it used to be, not for any ethical reasons, to be honest, just because I found I feel better if I don't eat tons of meat. But I know people who eat tons of meat and it works fine for them, so it's not a judgment one way or the other. And then some of the I suppose more controversial things that I would eat a lot of is I actually have quite a high sugar diet, and there's a lot of misinformation around sugar, and basically sugar is just the latest boogeyman that we can oversimplify all nutritional knowledge to and say, well, this is the problem, sugar is the problem. But sugar is a fairly benign substance. It's just a source of energy, and it's actually really good for increasing your metabolism because it's just pure energy. But with an increase in metabolism, you will need an increase in nutrients, because as your body runs more, it needs more resources. So you need to balance a high sugar or high carbohydrate intake with high levels of nutrients, which is a caveat, something to consider. So I eat a fair bit of ice cream. The thing with ice cream is that it's very high quality ice cream. So I only eat Haagen-Dazs, not because I'm rich or anything, but because I only ever get it when it's half price, and it's just a really high quality product. It's made with eggs, milk, cream, sugar, and vanilla extract. So this is what I mean in terms of this is something that you could have made via traditional means 100 years ago. Maybe you couldn't freeze things, but the actual components of it are available to you. Or you could use honey instead of sugar, if you want to be really picky. But these things are just natural, we'll say, ingredients that are readily available to mankind for a very long time now. So ice cream is a major part, not a major part, but it's a surprisingly big part, considering it's ice cream and considering what people would think of ice cream. And I make the distinction between high quality ice cream and what you would tend to get in a lot of shops, because the ones in shops would have a lot of added ingredients that are quite harsh on the gut lining. So a lot of gums, a lot of thickening agents that help give it this texture. And what you could see, just to kind of illustrate this, is if you get a pot of Haagen-Dazs and a pot of HB, like Hazelbrook Farm, whatever it's called, vanilla ice cream, and they melt differently. The other one melts to cream, and the other one has almost like a fibrousness to it. So yeah, my diet is largely, it's quite high in dairy. I didn't used to respond well to dairy, but once I found the types of dairy that suited me, I got a lot of benefits from that. So that's why I dislike blanket statements like dairy is bad for you. Certain forms of dairy can be good, and you might need to fine tune that. I have quite a high carbohydrate diet. I didn't used to. I did the whole low carb paleo thing, and that gave me some benefits in the short term, but it then caused tons of other problems, and it gave me a bit of pain relief initially, and that's, I think, because I got an increase in stress hormones. Stress hormones will tend to dull pain initially, but ultimately it caused significant damage to my internal physiology, and I feel like I'm still somewhat recovering from that, and that was about 4 or 5 years ago. So all of this is a process, and when it comes to health, when it comes to having been in pain for a long time, having had health issues in a long time, the process of healing can be quite a long process. That doesn't mean that you're going to be in pain for a long time, but it does mean that you might be fine-tuning things and investigating things for a while and making this a part of your life, and that's just reality. So yeah, I tried a lot of these dietary approaches, the popular ones, and I went through them. I got worse. I got better initially, then I got worse, and then I was like, well, why am I getting worse? Because everyone says this is good, and you start digging, and then you start seeing the flaws, and you start thinking at an individual level. You're not thinking from a prescriptive level. You're not saying, I'm going to eat this because this person said that's good. You start questioning things. And I was working in a health food shop for many years, and learning about all that helped me see through a lot of the inaccurate information that surrounds health and nutrition. So I suppose in summation, if you are going down one of these paths of ketosis, ketogenic diets, low carb, paleo, maybe it's right for you. I don't know. But always remain open to the fact that things might get worse, and that maybe it's just an initial honeymoon period, and things will catch up to you, and you will have new but different problems. So that's worth considering. So now to wrap up, in summary, I suppose to kind of encapsulate what we covered in this pretty long video, is that nutrition is individual, and if you want to figure out which approach is best for you, I believe you need to detach yourself from dietary dogma, and you need to engage in intuitive eating and monitoring your body's objective as well as subjective markers of health. So I would encourage you to eat mindfully, to pay attention to what happens after meals, and to track your body temperature and your pulse, and you will begin to paint a picture of how your body is responding to the foods you eat, and you'll begin to better understand your body's signals, your body's self-correcting signals. And I've included some resources in the description for further reading and for guidance on tracking things. as well as some information on foods that are generally safe regardless of individual differences, because some foods are just safe no matter who you are. And these are generally foods that are highly nutritious with minimal downsides. And what you could do as well is to have a look at the common foods in your diet and look up their anti-nutrient content, because again, all we tend to hear of are the benefits of a lot of these so-called health foods. We're not really informed of their downsides. So maybe you eat a lot of nuts and seeds in your diet, and maybe that's fine, but maybe it's not fine. So consider that. Maybe you eat a lot of leafy green vegetables. Everything you eat is a salad. And maybe there are downsides to that. I would suspect that there are downsides to that. I eat pretty much no salad ever, and my health has benefited from that. But again, that's individual. So like I said, the most common culprits I see that people underestimate are the leafy green vegetables. And that's because, there is a reason for this. It's because dark green vegetables, overground vegetables, basically they require a defense mechanism from predators, because, kale or spinach can't run away from anything that might eat it. So it needs to secrete certain substances that are called anti-nutrients to protect it from predators. Now, underground vegetables, below ground vegetables, things like potatoes, carrots, parsnips, that sort of thing, they tend to be safer because they don't require the same amount of anti-nutrients to protect themselves from predators, because they are protected by by being under the soil. Now, they do have some protective mechanisms, and that's worth considering, but generally it's far lower than the overground leafy vegetables. So that's something that you're not going to tend to hear from your Instagram gurus, and something that would you see a lot now. The popular trends in convenience foods is salad bars, and this kind of information doesn't really bode well for their business model. So, but ultimately, like I said, it's an industry. It's a health food industry, and there are large profits in pushing certain foods and certain trends and certain remedies and ignoring their downside and saying kale is so amazing for you. Let's ignore everything that's bad about kale, because here are a few things that sound really good. And what I would say is that at least in the pharmaceutical industry, they have to list the downside. So there are regulations, and they have to list the downsides, even though it might be in the finest of fine prints at the bottom of a booklet that you're never going to read, but they have to list them. They have to be upfront on some level about this. But a person selling you a kale salad or a kale supplement or whatever doesn't have to mention maybe the thyroid suppressing effects of this food or of that supplement or whatever it is. So what I would say is question everything. Question the health industry. Question nutritional information the same way you question big pharma and all that sort of stuff. So that's it for this episode. Quite a long one, quite a rambling one, quite a demanding one for me. I'm really hungry now, and that's something you can monitor in yourself when you're doing demanding things, mentally, physically demanding things. How do you respond? And I feel my body temperature is dropping a bit. I'm starting to feel stirring in my stomach, and I'm quite hungry. So you just grow an awareness of these things, and you can act accordingly, and you can ensure good health by being more aware. So what I would say is I hope that this information challenged your view of nutrition, and it encouraged you to ask some questions, and I hope it has given you some motivation and some direction, to look deeper and to better understand your health and pain issues, to start questioning maybe the dogma that you've been following without really questioning, because I think that's the key point. We need to sort of, people talk about unplugging from the matrix and all that kind of stuff, and it sounds a bit mad, but there's a certain reality to that. We need to kind of break that cycle. We need to just kind of break the constant marketing, the constant stuff that influences our thinking, influences our buying behaviors, because that's what it is. We're being influenced to buy certain things and to invest in certain things because it means profit for a certain group of people. And again, nothing inherently wrong with that, as far as I'm concerned. But we need to be informed, and we can then steer things in a better direction. So that's it for this episode. I hope you found it beneficial. I'm glad I wrote this out, because I could have rambled on for 3 hours on this, and it kept it relatively concise. So like I said, I hope you found it useful. And if you are still a bit confused, if you find you're now more confused than ever, please reach out and ask me any questions, and I'll try to simplify this as much as possible. So in summation, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Follow the Back Pain Coach on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook, and you can head to my website as well. I do a free coaching session, an initial coaching session, just to see what you need, and we can point you in the right direction. So get in touch for one of those, and we can have a chat and share this with anyone who needs it. And all the resources, everything, all the links are in the description. So thanks again for watching, and have a great day.